I wanted to show some of my cooler books. These are all very old books on the occult and mysticism, spiritualism. The Tree of Life, first edition from 1931, but tonight I wanted to look at this, which is How to Tell Fortunes with Cards by Wenzel Brown. This is the first book written completely logically and realistically about revelation of personality from ordinary playing cards. Fortune-telling, one of the oldest arcane arts, differs from astrology and magic in that it is divined in a logical, authoritative manner. As Wenzel Brown points out in this fascinating volume, the gypsies started telling fortunes with cards. But today, some practicing psychiatrists find that the spread of the cards is a tongue loosener for many whose problems cannot be brought to the surface in any other fashion. The place of a card in the spread, the touching of cards, the number of the same suit in the wing and in the whole spread are all indicative of the querent's personality and current problems. How will knowing what the cards reveal help anyone? By making the querent more clearly aware of the alternatives, by helping to determine appropriate time for action, by cautioning against ill omens, by pointing out clues to watch out for, types to recognize, and signs to make you stop and think. From the great lure of divination by cards, Mr. Brown has chosen the most comprehensive and reasonable prophecies and has presented them with many examples in a way that anyone can understand. Let's take a look at the first chapter. Chapter 1 is entitled A Brief History of Playing Cards. The oldest book in the world was disguised as a pack of playing cards. This is the tarot of the Bohemian, and spiritually it is the ancestor of all packs of playing cards sold today. Actually, although the origin of playing cards is lost in obscurity, it is certain that they predate the written word. One popular legend claims that cards were invented in China in the year 1120 AD to entertain the concubine to the emperor. Egyptian or gypsy playing cards were developed separately and are probably many centuries older. They once formed an integral part of the worship of the Egyptian god Thoth. Their symbols, religious in nature, were used to tell the future, to give advice, and to pronounce the will of the gods. These cards were known as the tarot, or the tables of fate, and there can be little doubt that some version of these cards was consulted by the Israelites upon divine command as recorded in the Book of Moses. Tarot cards were brought to Europe and made popular by the gypsies. They used them for fortune-telling, but it remained for the Crusaders to discover that cards could be adapted to games and gambling. The Crusaders introduced the cards to every capital of Europe, and soon each country developed its own national version of the tarot pack. In most of the tarot packs, each suit has 14 cards. Besides the king and queen, there were also the knight and the page. These have been combined into the jack of the modern pack. Some of the ancient packs had as many as 20 suits, but by the 13th century, they were fairly well standardized into 4. swords, which have become spades, the cups, which have become hearts, pentacles, coins, dishes, or money, which have become the diamonds, and lances, wands, or sticks, which have become clubs. Originally, there were 78 cards in the tarot, including 22 unnumbered cards known as triumphs. These were picture cards depicting such scenes as the House of God, the Wheel of Fate, the Hanging Man, etc. In arcane law, these cards constituted the major oracles, while the numerical cards were the minor oracles. The first known game of cards was called the Game of Human Life. And the cards were lined up on a board or table. Each player threw dice and moved a tab to the card designated by his throw. This game resembled closely the horse racing game so popular at resort hotels and on ocean liners, except that the forfeits had a distinctly moralistic aspect. For example, the player whose dice stranded him on the drunken man lost 2 turns and had to return to the child in his infancy. The final card was called the Immortal Man, and the player who first reached this goal would collect from his fellows. Our Puritan forefathers branded cards as the instruments of the devil, but this is a relatively modern point of view. During the Renaissance, many Eastern European countries outlawed all sports and games on Sundays, with the specific exception of cards, which were considered edifying and conducive to man's highest spiritual attainment. Perhaps the clue to the true value of cards can be found in the ancient book of Tarot, and it states that good and evil, when carried to the extreme, fuse into one and become inseparable. Even today, the gypsies claim that they possess a secret book more ancient than any known to man. This is the one and only true guide to divination by the cards. But if such a book exists, no copy has ever appeared outside of the gypsy world. It would seem more likely that the mysteries of gypsy fortune-telling have been handed down through the centuries by only word of mouth. From the dawn of their existence, cards have been credited with occult power. It is interesting to note, even in this day of scientific exploration and extrasensory perception, that the researchers at Duke University and other seats of learning have utilized cards as the best medium of experimentation. Disputes, often acrimonious in nature, have raged over the centuries concerning the exact significance of the symbols employed in the tarot. Kabbalists, Knights Templar, Freemasons, Theosophists, and countless scores of mystic and arcane cults have embraced these symbols and interpreted them in the light of their convictions. As the author of this book, I have no intention of entering into learned and scholarly controversies, but I do want to point out that fortune-telling by cards is not merely a game. Properly used, popular playing cards can provide an introduction to a philosophy and wisdom more ancient than any of the Western religions. The first chapter of how to Tell Fortunes with Cards by Wenzel Brown. Further chapters break down the different types of spreads, the individual values of each of the cards. In evaluating the cards, it should be stressed again that each card is shaded by those which surround it. The spread is an entity of which each of the 15 cards is an integral part. Many of the cards have acquired some of the characteristics of the major cards or the triumphs of the tarot, which have been eliminated from the standard pack of cards. A particular challenge is offered by the jacks because they serve the double purpose of the knights and pages. As the reader becomes more expert in divining the future through the cards, he will discover that certain cards take on special meanings or shadings in his hands. This is completely valid. According to Gypsy lore, the oracle speaks to each diviner in a separate tongue. Before turning to an examination of the individual cards, a final warning should be offered to the reader. Many times the querent will wish to discuss his problems at length with the reader and may press for direct advice. It cannot be repeated too often that the ultimate decisions must rest upon the querent. The reader should limit his responsibility to helping clarify the goals, so the querent's actions will be motivated by considered judgment and in accordance with his own highest ideals.